Welcome to Yellowstone Story. Every story holds a lesson, a twist, or a spark of inspiration. Here, we dive into gripping tales, some heartwarming, some shocking, but all unforgettable. So sit back, relax, and let's begin. My father could say whatever he wanted, but I had already made my decision. He believed he knew what was best for me. Daniel? Yes. He was handsome, and his singing could captivate anyone. But my father was certain I shouldn't marry him. Kyle is the one you need. With him, you'll be safe, like behind a stone wall, he repeated, convinced that only Kyle could protect me. I couldn't believe he was serious. He tried to hug me, but I turned away. Tears streamed down my cheeks on their own. You can't force love, I whispered. But my father just shook his head. Later, my mother helped me out of my dress. I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole night was nothing but a terrible dream. My eyes kept darting toward the door, waiting for Kyle to come in. He did, eventually, but only stood there, silently looking at me. You're leaving? My voice wavered. What am I supposed to tell people, or do I disgust you that much? I jumped to my feet and took a step toward him. He hesitated, then gently draped a warm blanket over my shoulders. I like you. A lot, he said quietly. You are kind, you are good. But you don't need me, I can see that. He stepped back, turned toward the door. We'll manage, he added. But until you want to be here, I can't. The door closed behind him. That will never happen, I shouted after him, my voice filled with anger. But there was no reply. I ran into Daniel by chance in broad daylight. He reeked of alcohol, and before I could say anything, he grabbed my wrist, pulled me closer, and tried to kiss me. Are you insane? I jerked away, struggling to break free. He just smirked, his breath heavy with whiskey. You're married now. So what difference does it make? Or do you not love me anymore? I didn't answer. I simply turned around and walked away without looking back. Days passed, and Kyle and I started living separately from my parents. He was always busy, fixing up the house, repairing the fence, working in the garage. I tried not to think about the future, not to search for hidden meaning in his silence. One day, we went into the woods, just to get some fresh air and pick mushrooms. I stepped on a root the wrong way and twisted my ankle. Before I could even react, Kyle scooped me up in his arms and carried me back home. Then came the quiet evenings. He pushed me gently on the swings by the lake, and the little duckling, waddling clumsily, was always close by. Daniel. He was seeing Kate. I knew it, had heard the rumors. Their wedding was only a matter of time. But the strange thing was, I no longer felt jealous. I looked at Kyle, at how effortlessly he handled any task, at how attentively he listened to people. And for the first time, I didn't understand why I had ever despised him. But life didn't give me time to sort out my feelings. That night, I was woken by noise, the smell of smoke. I ran outside. The house next door was on fire. People were already gathering, trying to help. The woman who lived there stood with her 2 children, clutching them tightly in fear. You're lucky to have a husband like him, she suddenly said, grabbing my hand. He got us all out. He was the first to run in. I froze. Kyle? Where is he? A cold knot formed in my chest. He's still inside, she said softly. There's still a dog in there, our Baxter. The woman whispered through tears, wiping her face with her sleeve. He hid somewhere inside, and I mentioned it to Kyle without thinking. And he went back in. He didn't have to. But the kids. They were crying for him. I barely had time to process her words before the roof collapsed with a deafening crash. The world blurred, and the last thing I remembered was the scream that tore from my throat. I came to at the gentle touch of a hand on my face. Someone was brushing away dust and soot, their touch careful. I opened my eyes. Kyle was leaning over me. Are you okay? My voice was hoarse. Made it out through the window. Barely found Baxter, he was hiding under the bed. Took some effort to get him out, Kyle said calmly, still smiling as if nothing had happened. He spoke so simply, as if he hadn't just risked his own life. I looked at his face, smudged with soot, and felt my hands tremble. I was scared for you. The words slipped from my lips before I could stop them, and suddenly I broke down in sobs, burying my face in his shoulder. I love you, I breathed, no longer doubting it. 9 months later, our son Nick was born. Kyle, as if inheriting his father's skill, worked with animals. People from all over the county came to him. He could bring even the most hopeless cases back to health. I watched him with admiration and couldn't understand how I had ever longed for someone like Daniel. Daniel married Kate, but their life together fell apart. He drank, partied, and eventually ruined her life, leaving her disabled. I watched their fate unfold with fear and realization. If not for my father, I could have been in her place. There was a time when I hated him for crushing my dreams, but now I understood. He had saved me. I stepped outside. My father was sitting on the porch playing with little Nick. Dad, I stopped beside him. I want to thank you for not letting me marry Daniel, for knowing what was truly best for me. I leaned down and kissed his cheek. He sighed, smiling. The important thing is that you understand now, sweetheart. We old folks, we see people for who they really are. I couldn't let my only daughter end up with a man like that. I knew you were angry at me. So what? Time always puts everything in its place. Be happy, my girl, he said. I lived a long life with Kyle. We did everything together. When he worked in the field, I was by his side. When he repaired the house, I helped. We raised 5 children and lived to see our grandchildren. Looking at our big family, at our children, our grandchildren, at Kyle, who was still by my side as always, I realized that true love doesn't always come at once. Sometimes it grows from care, from actions, from the warm look someone gives you every single day. My father was right. I didn't understand it then, but now I knew for certain. He didn't just give me a marriage. He gave me a life filled with love and happiness. He was always firm in his decisions. I knew arguing was useless. He had decided, and that was it. There was only one thing left for me, to run to Daniel. I knew where he would be waiting, by the lake where we used to meet in secret. My heart pounded harder when I saw him, so handsome, so free. I wanted to spend my whole life with him. At that moment, I hated my father more than I ever thought I could. He had always been my support, my role model, but now he was destroying my life. My tears, my pleas, my desperate attempts to change his mind meant nothing. He had already decided for me. Has he changed his mind? Or is he still as stubborn? Daniel asked quietly, running a hand through his dark curls, his deep eyes filled with concern as they locked onto mine. I just shook my head, unable to hold back my tears. Daniel pulled me into his arms, letting me cry against his chest. Try again. He exhaled, what's wrong with me in his eyes. I have a house, a job, everything we need. Why is he so stubborn? Frustrated, he swung his foot, and I heard a faint squeak. A tiny duckling was limping on the sand near the shore. Watch out! You almost stepped on it, I exclaimed. Oh, come on, it's just a duck, Daniel scoffed. Let's go. No need to stop over something so trivial. He waved dismissively and led me away. But as I walked back home later, my thoughts were no longer just about my father and Daniel. I ran into Kyle. He was standing on the driveway holding that same little duckling in his hands. The moment he saw me, his face turned red. He had always been like that, shy and quiet. Short, freckled, with blonde hair and pale blue eyes that almost looked washed out. My father saw something in him that I never did. Unremarkable, simple. Nothing like Daniel. I was about to say something sarcastic, but then I noticed the duckling in his hands. "What are you doing with it?" I smirked. Kyle shrugged. "I went for a swim at the lake and saw it lying there, chirping. Looks like it hurt its leg. My dad knows how to treat animals. He'll take a look. If it's broken, we can put a splint on it." He looked at me simply, without any hint of pretense. And then it hit me. Daniel. He had kicked that duckling. I had seen it happen, but hadn't thought much of it at the time. He didn't care at all. But Kyle, he had saved it. A strange feeling crept over me. My cheeks burned, and I quickly turned away, hurrying off before my emotions could betray me. How was this possible? The man I loved hadn't given a second thought to the helpless creature, while the one I had dismissed as unworthy had shown kindness. From that day on, the duckling followed Kyle everywhere. It even slept beside him on the porch, waddling clumsily after its new owner. "What a joke," Daniel sneered when he saw them together. "There are shepherds, and then there's you. A duck herd." I said nothing, but something inside me shifted. "They're only good for dinner," Daniel added with a smirk the next time he spotted Kyle with the duckling. He was clearly trying to provoke him, but Kyle just walked past him, unfazed, as if he hadn't heard a word. Soon, the wedding date was announced. My wedding to Kyle. I cried into my pillow every night. Daniel begged me to run away with him, to leave this town and start over, but I knew it was impossible. My father would never forgive me. His will was absolute, and my mother had always remained silent, obediently following his decisions. I was an only child. My brothers hadn't survived infancy, and my mother was often ill. I knew I was everything to my father, his hope, his purpose, and yet, why didn't he let me choose for myself? On the day of the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. The white dress fit perfectly. My golden hair was neatly styled. I looked like a real bride. My father entered the room, walked up to me in silence, and kissed my forehead. "You're the most beautiful," he said. I didn't answer. I only pressed my lips together and turned away. He watched me warmly, but I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. "You're angry with me, aren't you, sweetheart?" he asked softly. "I just want you to be happy. You'll thank me one day." "Never," I whispered. I did as he wanted, but what was there to thank him for? I turned to the window, staring into the darkness. Downstairs, among the guests, Daniel was dancing with Kate. I had always noticed the way she looked at him, knew that she wanted him. Now, he was free, and I was not. I was Kyle's wife, and nothing could change that. I glanced at my husband discreetly. Unlike the others, he wasn't drinking. At his feet, the little duckling waddled around. Silly, ridiculous. They both looked absurd.